Okay. I hope you're all well. It's good to be back and talking to you about languages again. Obviously, it's my favourite topic, and I hope it's yours, or at least up there in your top few favourite things to talk about. Great to see you. Yeah, welcome. Nice to see you too. Thank you for joining. And so I'm going to go through the many questions that I have that I got before the chat. I'll start with those, and then what I'll do is go through the questions that come in as more of you arrive. Good to see you all coming. Welcome, welcome, welcome. And so I'll crack on with some of the questions that I got for people who wrote to me before the live. So the very first question is actually in Turkish. So I will say it in Turkish, and then I will answer in English as well, so that more people understand. So yeni bir dil öğrenirken kendi dilimizi unutabilir miyiz? Diye bir durum varsa ne yapabilir? Ben bunu hiç duymadım, bu durum. Çünkü genellikle eskiden evet. Çünkü eskiden çok zor, çok zormuş bir dil öğrenmek ve yeni bir ülke yaşarken eski ve ana dili unutabilirsiniz. Tabii sadece bugün bana göre daha zor oldu. Çünkü internette ve teknolojikle daha zor oldu. Çünkü bana göre evde her dil dünyadan duyabiliriz ve bu yüzden daha kolay oldu ve bana göre, çünkü ben şimdi artık bu durumu hiç duymuyorum, ama sen bana bunu söyledi ve nasıl düşünüyorsun? Düşünüyorsun bu sadece çok zor bir durum şimdi. Bana göre daha kolay oldu ve sadece internetle her dil öğrenebiliriz ve her dil duyabiliriz ve bu yüzden daha fazla seçenek var. So the question was about forgetting your mother tongue, and basically it was said that the first you could forget your first language, and if you were to do that, what would you do? And my response is really that I don't know that as a modern day problem. It's not something that I hear about nowadays. I've heard about it in the past. So that was an issue for people, for example, who moved away and then they had no contact. But nowadays we have the internet, we have a lot of technology, and so I think you can hear and keep up with pretty much any language, which makes things a lot easier, if that makes sense. So I think that I don't see it as a big problem, but the person who wrote, if you have an issue that you think it's more relevant for today, then please feel free to get back to me on that. But I'm not so familiar with that as an idea as a big issue now. I have other questions about language learning. So talking about accelerating the language learning process. I had questions about motivation, how to get motivation, and how to, let me see, how I learn languages, and setting myself goals, learning topic by topic, and to which level I do that. And I think I'm going to try and put all those together in one answer. So for myself, I think that, and setting priorities as well. So I think that motivation and priorities and setting your goals are really all linked together, because if you set yourself goals that are way beyond what's possible, then I think that's when motivation naturally just disappears. So I would always say that it's important from the outset when you're learning any language or anything, in fact, that you set yourself clear and realistic goals. So that would mean that you would say to yourself, okay, within the next month, I want to learn the days of the week, the months of the year, talking about my family, talking about what I do at certain times of the year, for example, and linking those topics together. And then you link the topics and spread out, really, to be able to talk about a number of different things. So I would say that that would be, for me, the first thing I think is important to do, because that helps with motivation and setting goals. And the topic by topic, kind of, yeah, I would say that in the beginning, for example, particularly the A1, A2, possibly even into B1 as well levels, that learning different types of topics of conversation. So in the beginning, it would be very much kind of daily routine, about the family, about your job, about your travels, about your plans, about the weather, about what's going on at home, daily routines, how you do things, what you do, how you do things at home generally. And there are lots of things like that that you need to talk about generally in language, and then it builds out from there. So then you get onto I guess more topics that you would debate. So things to do with, politics, things happening in the world. Often, depending on what you're learning a language for, you may just skip some of the basic topics. You may have holes in your vocabulary and holes in your knowledge, and that doesn't necessarily mean it's a bad thing. It just means that you're focusing on what you really need. So if you're learning, say, for example, a language that's similar to a language you speak, it could be that if someone were to ask you for instructions on how to make a cake, you couldn't do it, but you may be able to talk about the political situation in the country and do that quite easily. So you've got to also be sort of aware that if you do that, it's great. I mean, if that's what your goal is, but you've got to be very clear with yourself. That's my goal. I want to do that. And naturally, if you move into different areas or you meet people and you want to talk about other things, you are going to have to fill those holes eventually. And you can have that feeling that you almost feel like an imposter or you're a fake, because you can talk quite eloquently maybe about certain things, but then about other things, you almost feel like you've gone back to being a beginner, and they're topics that maybe are usually covered at the A1 or A2 stage in learning a language. So yes, it's super important to really be clear on what you want to do, because it saves you feeling bad as well about your knowledge later on. So there we go. That's kind of what I keep in mind. And then I had a question about accelerating language learning. Well, that would be basically if you are learning every day, so you're repeating things on a daily basis, you're using your free time to listen to language, to consider the language that you've been learning, to actively think about and in the language. That's really important. And if you do that, you basically keep clocking up more and more hours and more time that you're actually studying or thinking about the language and processing the language. And that's the way that you do things quickly. There's no, unfortunately, sort of actually physically taking days off study. I don't think that's a thing. I think that what you can do, though, is use the time that you have wisely and get in as many of those extra minutes and hours that add up to your exposure to the language, and therefore the learning appears to be accelerated, if that makes sense. So it would be the difference of, for example, you have 2 lessons a week. Let's say you have 2 lessons a week, and person 1 says, okay, I've got a lesson on a Monday and a lesson on a Friday for my language, whether it's French or German or whatever the language is. So they have 2 contact hours a week, and they have some homework to do for the lessons, maybe. And then they do the homework. Very often, many people will do it the night before the lesson, and or even the day of the lesson, just before the lesson starts. But then they only have 2 contact hours. Person B would then, let's say, who's going to learn things a lot more quickly, will often have those 2 lessons. But then after the first lesson's finished, they would probably then do the homework or start doing some of the homework after the lessons, because it's still fresh in their mind. Then they might revise and look over that the following day. The day after that, they would go back over the lesson, look and consider the words, and then the next time, the next day, they would maybe go through the homework again just before the next lesson on the Friday, and they would consider, for example, the answers that they gave, and go to the lesson, and then they would then build from that knowledge onto the next lesson and then move on. And what happens is, because they're doing that, they're being active the days in between. They're actually building from a higher level than person one, who would be going in from a, almost, you've forgotten most of what you learned the first lesson and you're just moving a lot more slowly. And that's how you move quickly in language learning. That's the big secret that everybody seems to be after, but that's exactly what you have to do. There is unfortunately no other no other real secret except for putting in the hours. I wish there were. I wish there were a pill that you could take, or you could do something, but yeah, unfortunately, that's it. That's the secret. So there we go. I had a question about learning Spanish verb tenses. I get that, you know, in Latin languages, there are a lot of verb tenses. A lot of things change quite a lot and quite radically. And honestly, it is a matter of practice. So one of the things that you do when you're learning any language as well is, so let's say you're learning a topic like, I don't know, what the weather's like. Yeah, it's raining today. Today it's raining, it's cold, whatever. And then learn to talk about that in the past tense. So yesterday, though, it was hot and sunny. And then tomorrow it will be. And you're practicing the tenses that way, in a natural kind of way, right? And you what you need to do is make sure you add in those expansions of vocabulary with grammar each time you use them. And you have to do that in a conscious way, so that you're not just giving one word answers or just saying one word, you know, one phrase, and that's it. Because if you want to make the most of practicing a language, you need to really take the time to exercise. I guess it's the same for any kind of exercise. You know, you could go to the gym and do one type of exercise, or you could go to the gym and actually use all of the equipment in the gym. So it's the same with languages. I mean, if you want to learn to use all the tenses, and let's say, for example, in Spanish, where you have tenses and differences between the conjugations for each personal pronoun, so the people involved, what you can do is things like, you know, you say, so I really like swimming, but my brother likes to go to the park and walk. Yesterday I went swimming and he went to the swimming pool. So he went to the swimming pool with me, but he walked around the park near the swimming pool. And my sister, she doesn't like swimming and she doesn't like walking. She just likes to watch TV. She stayed at home and watched TV all day. And then you could talk about my parents. They went skydiving, or whatever they went and did. But you expand it out just so that you're constantly changing the verb time, changing the verb tense. Last year we did this. This year we're doing that. Next year we're going to do another thing that's completely different. And you have to keep changing things up. And the more you practice, the more automatic those changes become in your speech. Hope that helps. In my mind, it feels like I'm swinging through a tree and I'm holding a branch or sort of a rope, and I'm grabbing onto the next rope, and it feels almost seamless like that, the change. But you have to make that feel normal and seamless and effortless. And it takes practice. So let me see. How do you learn a language after taking a significant break? That is actually an interesting topic. You'll often, you know, get to a language, you'll study it for a while, and then you just don't have any time to use it. And for whatever reason, the reasons for learning it changed. Your situation changed. You got a new job. You changed your role in your current job. You started studying. You had a child. You got married. You got sick. Anything can happen in life, and that changes what you do and how you work and how you can take on different things that you do, right? So that happens to us all. We're all human. And so when this happens, and let's say a language gets left behind, and you want to come back to it, then what I say is that the best thing to do is to go back to your materials that you used and just start going through them again and see how much of it actually you realize has gone or is dormant. I've just had this actually with Finnish. I used some books called Suomen Mestari, that I used before I went to Finland, and then I used them in Finland. And because it's such a different language to the other languages I already speak and speak well, I noticed that actually my level of Finnish drops quite dramatically. Whereas a language that is similar to another language I speak, the drop isn't so significant, and I can get it back a lot more quickly. With Finnish, it actually went quite quickly, quite fast. So I've started going back through my old books just to sort of see where I am with Finnish, and it is coming back slowly, but it's taking time. And I think it's being patient, doing it regularly, and just pretend like it's a new language. I've just done the same thing with Indonesian. So I've taken Indonesian from being completely dormant, and a language if you'd have asked me to speak Indonesian even like 4 months ago, I wouldn't have been able to say very much to you at all. Now I can hold a conversation with my teacher for half an hour, and it's not such a big problem. I mean, it's not going to be perfect, but I can definitely get by in Indonesian in like sort of general situations. So it just takes time practicing it and putting in regular study, and listening in between, as I said, with any language learning if you're doing a new one. So yes, that's what I would do. Okay, I got a question about how do you maintain so many languages? Is it second nature to me now? It kind of is second nature, just because for me, I've obviously gone to an extreme with language learning, and I recognize it as an extreme. It's not the thing that people normally do. Normally people will learn a language, 2 languages, a few languages because they want to do it for different reasons. Not everybody is going to want to go and study lots and lots of languages just for the fun of it. I recognize that it's a more extreme passion for me than it is for everyone else. And I definitely don't sit there and say everyone should do what I do, because I don't think it's the most useful thing for everyone in the world to do. It's good for some of us to do, of course, and if you're very passionate, then go for it. But it's not something I think that everyone needs to necessarily do. But for me personally, my life is actually adapted to my languages, so my languages fit around my life now. I grew up as a monolingual English speaker, and then I learned a number of languages, and then as I got older, I studied languages at university, and then a number of institutions outside as well. And then I got jobs where I used my languages and actually aimed to use my languages more and more and more, so that the job would fit my knowledge. And a similar thing with my living, sort of my daily existence is language related, because I'm now based in the Balkans, and having many languages spoken in and around here. So that's kind of how I do it. It's become second nature in that way. I got a question about how do you teach English, or could be any other language, I guess, to a relative, and in this case a niece or a nephew, that the person won't see often. So it would depend on the parents. I mean, I would talk to the parents if you're aiming to teach a child. It's not your child. You need to have an agreement or an understanding with the parents first of all. And if they want that, then I think it could potentially work. If you don't see them often, it would be a little bit more difficult, because for children, time moves a lot more slowly. Just the perception of time is very different, just in terms of percentage of how long a week or a month or a year is for a child compared to somebody who's an adult. It's just very different. So this year 2020 is a really good example. Having been stuck at home for a long time, for me as an adult, it represents this amount of my life. For my daughter, who's 13, it represents like this much of her life, in total. So it is a little bit more complicated with children. Generally, the advice is that they have a minimum of an hour of contact a day as babies with a language, and then they can then pick the language up slowly. If it's going to be less frequent than that, then it may be worthwhile, saying what you can when you can, of course, but then also just have in mind that you're only going to get out what you put in. Like with adult language learning, for a child, if they don't hear a language from 1 month to the next, they can't be expected to pick up that language so well so quickly. They also forget things. They can't write things down. They don't have a way of remembering things in the same way as, say, an adult. They can't, get online as a baby and do things that way. But you can do something, and I think it's very nice that you want to pass something like that on to your nephew or niece. So I wish you all the best for that. And yeah, setting up a regular time to at least talk or do something, I think, is the first positive step forward in doing that. And if you're doing it, make sure you make the conversations meaningful, that actually interact and impact into the child's world. So if you're trying to teach a child a language, it has to have a tangible meaning for them. So it's either through play, normally through actions, so that the child can actually put the language onto an action, so that it's in their real world. So yeah, making sure it's all in play. Like, tell them the green bottle, pass me the green bottle, and I take the green bottle. Give me the green bottle, and you give the green bottle. And thank you. Yes, and it's all interactions like that with children. That's how they learn best, I think. Songs as well. Songs are really cool. They're really good. So learn songs and teach them songs. Children like songs and music. I did that a lot with my daughter. Okay, so learning vocabulary. Learning vocabulary is a tricky one. So it's one of those things that just takes a lot of time. If there's certain vocabulary you need to learn for a particular reason, then I say make some notes of what you want to say, and when you have conversations, make an effort to get at least 2 or 3 new words into the conversation each time. That way you're actively making an effort to use vocabulary that you're hearing or you need to use to express your thoughts. Generally, vocabulary tends to stick with you when you've heard it so many times, or you've used it so many times that it just becomes second nature. And the only way to do that really in a very effective manner is to be exposed to the language a lot. And that means taking time to read, to listen to the language, to speak the language actively, and to use it for whatever you want to do. So if you've got an interest in something in particular that outside just language learning, you could maybe try and find some information on that subject in the language as well as you move forward with it. But that's how it is. Banter in a foreign language. So, and how do I manage that? So banter, if anybody doesn't know, is an English phenomenon for sure, where you kind of have this conversation that goes backwards and forwards. And it can be a bit jokey, it can be a bit, a bit fun, just to sort of build a rapport with somebody else. And it's possible in other languages too. I do tend to do it. This is where, for example, the question comes up very often: am I a different personality in different languages? Do I feel different in a different language that I speak? And the answer for me is no. I don't change. I am who I am in every single language. The only thing is the perception of me changes. So how I'm perceived through my native tongue of English versus how I'm perceived through my home language of Macedonian is completely different. So what I find naturally funny can't change. It just can't change. It's my humor is my humor, and it's a cultural thing. It's something that's been built into me. It's also something that has maybe changed a little bit itself as I've gone through life and had experiences. But certain things, for example, from English, like plays on words that I see that are similar, that are funny, that doesn't translate into Macedonian. Macedonian doesn't use play on words as anywhere near as often, or it's nowhere near as common as it is in English. So if I sometimes see a word that relates to another word and I make a joke about it, people look at me like I've gone crazy. So sometimes with banter, I have to rein in my natural personality and just not act, but just be conscious of the public. So sometimes banter is affected by that. It's affected by what the social norms are, what kind of things people talk about and laugh about in a different language. So that I can do it. It's just it's quite funny, especially when I try and tell jokes. I get myself into a lot of trouble, and my wife tells me off. So let me see. A non-phonetical alphabet and how it is learning those. So a language like English, for example, where there's no one-on-one correspondence between a letter and pronunciation of that letter. It can change depending on the word, and how we represent those words are very different in written and spoken form. So it can be difficult and challenging. Just honestly, writing a lot is going to help things like that. It just gets you used to it. A reading as well helps with those kinds of things. I've got to say that, yeah, I find languages that are not so phonetical a little bit challenging myself, because yeah, they don't really make much sense when you try and write them. But fortunately, I mean, there are normally some kinds of rules around. They're not so wildly different that they make zero sense. So yeah, sometimes it's a matter of learning a few words and a few funny rules that just take you that bit further. But yeah, I know it's not always easy. But yeah, writing is a good way of doing it, because that's your muscle memory that will kick in. And also, if you get to a word that particularly you find difficult, maybe come up with a funny story in your head about how you spell it. We used to get that at school when we were learning English. Wednesday, and you'd have to say, instead of Wednesday, Wednesday. And then we'd have words like friend, and the teacher told us fry the end, fry with an I, the end. And there were kind of songs and things that you learn when you're learning these things, like the word necessary, one collar and two socks. That's what we say in English. So it's one C and two S's. So there are certain tricks like that you can learn in every language. And if it's for example a Slavic language where they have these consonant pairs, these these sound pairs that they call, they're basically like a word like, for example, in Macedonian is leb. Leb is the word for bread, and it ends in a B when you write it, but you pronounce it like a P because it's at the end of the word. Normally Macedonian is very phonetic. You just write it as you say it. But then the way to remember it is to say it with a form at the end, whether that's in some Slavic languages a case form, or whether it's in Macedonian with used to add the ending the bread, lebot. Then you hear the b sound, and it's leb and not lep, like with a p at the end. So that's kind of how you do it. Learning things, little tricks like that in each language. Now, let me just see. I think I've almost got to the end of those questions. Okay. Curious cognates between different languages. Sometimes, yeah, languages they have cognates. They have words that have passed through because of trade, because of history, because of religion, because of many, many different reasons. So there are languages, for example, the word for a tool that you use in Macedonian is alat. Alat is a Turkish word that's come from Arabic, and it also made its way to Indonesian. So it went all the way around the world, and they have the same word in Indonesian. So sometimes you do find these funny cognates that the languages are not related at all, but they have some words in common because of these intermediary languages, because of, as I say, religion, because of cultural exchanges. Hungarian has a lot of Slavic words for that reason, so it's taken, and some Turkish words as well, that it's taken because of cultural exchanges, and they're not Hungarian words, but because of borders, because of people mixing, and people exchanging ideas and services and products. Over the years, over the centuries, the languages have been infused with some words. Romanian's another one that's not related. It's got some Turkish words in. It's Greek also, and so does Albanian. So a number of these languages do. They have these words. Sometimes sometimes the interesting thing is that they change meaning, or they can be used for other things. So, for example, the word for the word for a pocket in many Balkan languages is jep or zepi in Greek, or in Bulgarian, for example, jobche is actually a word that you can use for a pocket, but also for the plastic sheets that you put paper in. In a folder, you put them in. What would we call those again? So jobčitu is this in Bulgarian as well. So you get some really strange crossovers, and you can't use that word in Macedonian, for example, or in other languages that I know in the Balkans for that meaning. It's just the Bulgarian that's changed this meaning for this plastic sheet thing that you put your paper in. So yeah, I quite like those things. So now I've got to the end of the questions I had. It's taken me quite a lot of time to this time. I had quite a lot of questions though. So I hope that was interesting for you all, and I'll do my best to go through your questions and comments. Hello, hello. Snakker du litt norsk? Ja, jeg snakker litt norsk. Jeg har lært norsk. Jeg gikk bare over en måned jeg var i Norge. Jeg snakket med folket der på norsk. Men for meg er det lettere å snakke svensk. Det er mitt første språket, skandinaviske språket. Så, men det er helt okay. Yeah. Let me see. Hi, Chris. Nice to see you. I'm glad you made it and you didn't forget. Cześć, Wojtek. Zdravo. Zdravo, Susanna. Kako si? Let me see. So this starts at 7 on a Thursday usually. I may actually need to change the time of this moving forward, and maybe even the day, but I will let you know before I do, just so you know. I will give you some time. If you've got any ideas of times or days that are better, then let me know. Comment vous êtes? Okay, wow. Bonsoir. Comment vous êtes? Okay, I can understand what you're saying. Thank you. I'm very well, thank you. I can't reply though, unfortunately, in an authentic way. I like it when I see these things. Pozdrav iz Ljubljane. Pozdrav. Kako gre? Greetings, Versa. Hello, hello. Okay. Do you have any good recommendations on French textbooks that will allow the student from A1 to C1? Thank you for your kind words as well. I'm glad you find it motivating that I do these things. It's always nice to hear. It's very strange actually when people ask me for resources in French or in Spanish or languages like that. It's been so long since I learned them that it's a bit tough to recommend something. And I don't know of a textbook itself that will take you all the way from A1 to C1. It's quite a big ask. Probably there are going to be a lot of things out there. I think there's just so much choice for some of these languages that it's a bit difficult to make a decision as well. Other languages are a little bit easier because they have fewer resources. My best recommendation would be to go to a bookstore and just spend a good hour poring over the books and look through them. And just see which ones resonate with you most, which ones appeal to you visually and with their explanations. I'm sorry it's not the best of answers, but it's the most honest answer that I can give you. I'd rather say that than give you sort of an answer that doesn't really mean very much. So yeah, I would definitely say it's best to do that. And I think generally with languages anyway, if you're learning a language, it's good to have a book that appeals to you personally. Que sobre que estão das línguas ao vivo. Este ganhou. Este gênio. Obrigado. Obrigado. Dobar sam, hvala. A ti? Dobar sam. Kući. Šta da radimo, Suzana? Šta da radimo s virusom? Nema način sad da radimo ništa. Ali to je to. to život. Okay, let me see. I'm going to go back to YouTube just to check to make sure I've got some. Let pozdrav Slovenia. Pozdrav Slovenia. Jodman. Let me see. Can I reiterate my opinion and method for learning and watching TV, as it's tempting to watch TV more for the content, okay? And if you understand it, yeah. So TV can be good. It can also depends what you're doing it for. So if you're just doing TV, then it can take a long time, of course, because you need a lot of exposure. But it can be a good way to practice a language and to get into a language. I think that it's useful to have some subtitles, depending on which way around you're doing it. So whether you're doing it, you're listening to it in a language you already speak or understand, and then you have the subtitles in the target language, can be good, but you have to be very disciplined if you're doing that you don't end up just watching the program in the language you understand and then not paying any attention to the target language. So it's super important that you take that into account. And then if it's the language itself, it can be, it can sometimes, depending on the language, some languages are easier to listen to at different sort of all levels than others, and it depends on the content. But yes, I think that particularly if you enjoy it, it's quite nice to watch something in a language, because it means that you're kind of letting the language flow over you, the rhythm of the language. You're hearing words that you're familiar with, and if you're finding that you're not understanding anything, then sometimes subtitles will help just to sort of make it more bearable. Otherwise, it can be a little bit intimidating, I think, to just hear a wall of language that you have zero idea what they're saying, and it just helps you get into it a little bit. But yeah, I've used TV a few times for a few different languages, and it's worked fairly well for me. So yeah, I would say, even if you don't know anything at all, it can be good. Don't go overboard if you don't know anything at all, because if you're watching hours and hours of a show and you're just reading the subtitles, then the language may well go over you, but it just also, you may end up just getting taken over by the subtitles. So I'd say do it in moderation in the beginning. If you're just watching TV, it needs to be done with something active as well. I'm a great believer in, yes, the whole passive thing and listening to everything is great, but without any active, anything active on your part, it can end up just becoming a passive skill. I mean, if that's what you want to be, a passive skill, that's fine. But if your goal is to actually speak the language, you do need to make a conscious effort to do something else as well to go with that. Is Icelandic very diverse? What do you think about Icelandic dialects? So Icelandic dialects. So in Iceland, there's definitely a northern way of speaking, like Akureyri, and sort of southern, like Reykjavik. So there's definitely Akureyri and Reykjavik dialects, and there are different ways of speaking Icelandic, of course. Much more than that, though, to be honest. I mean, it's a very small country, Iceland, and it's not like that. People who speak Akureyri dialect and people who speak Reykjavik dialect, for example, they can't understand each other. They're not that diverse. It's not like, say, for example, somebody from Hamburg in Germany goes to somewhere in Zurich and they speak their own natural dialects. It would be a lot more difficult. If you speak just Hochdeutsch, if you're from Münster and you speak the most sort of pure Hochdeutsch, and then you go to Zurich or to Bern or somewhere in Switzerland, and they speak Berndic or Zurichdic, their versions of Swiss German, then the comprehension would be a lot less. In fact, they may not even really have a good conversation at all. So yeah, I mean, yeah, it's not to that point in Icelandic. What are your thoughts on different language learning methods? For example, languages at school, online courses, and language apps, and the pros and cons, based on my experience. Well, so I'd say that it's a very personal thing what you use. I'm a great believer in there are an awful lot of materials out there because there are an awful lot of different people out there, and so there's not one thing that works for everyone. Personally, I do enjoy language courses in schools, and I like going to university and studying. I like going to courses, and the reason I like that is because it takes you out of your comfort zone. So what I find happens in language learning, if you're just doing it on your own all the time, is that you just stick to the same things and you learn to say the same things over and over again. And this is where the imposter syndrome almost really kicks in, because you feel so confident saying the things that you know how to say that you never really say anything different. Whereas if you go to a course one evening, the teacher will say to you something like, okay, today we're going to learn how to make a cake. and it may not even be the thing that you want to do, but you need to be able to know how to make a cake, because you need to know how to manipulate all of the different verbs and all of the different vocabulary in the language to say different things. And it's a really good way of doing that, because it takes you out of your comfort zone. It gets you talking to other people. You also hear about other people's norms and how they use the language and how they want to express themselves. And it just helps to sort of widen your vocabulary and your experience of the language. And that's how I feel about language courses. Some people don't like them, and I get it. Sometimes it can be a bit slow, but more often than not, actually, I find if you find a decent course, it's pretty good. It's pretty good for learning. And then I'd say that with language apps, yeah, there are some decent ones out there. I mean, obviously, people have good experience of say, Memrise. Clearly, there are very popular ones that are sort of in the news a lot more, like Duolingo and things like that. I find Link to be probably one of the better apps that I use. That's not often in the sort of the mainstream, because it uses, you can bring in like news stories, you can bring in podcasts and all sorts of things, and that really does work, because it gives you access to a lot of language, and it's pretty serious stuff as well. So yeah, that's kind of what in terms of apps that work for me. I've used, Memrise is okay, it's pretty good, and then yeah, I mean, it depends as well. I mean, like there are language apps like UTalk that will use sort of lists in sort of a vocabulary and some phrases that are good for like maybe travel, or if you want to just have a smattering of the language in different places. So I've tried some of that, and yeah, I mean, in terms of serious language learning though, I much prefer having those as things that I add on and play with in addition. There's only really Link that I would, as sort of a consistent language learning app that I would use, that goes from a basic level right the way up to, well, anything you could possibly get in the language. It's the only one that I know of that would do that in that kind of sturdy, robust way, if you really learn to use and manipulate the application. And then other things that you said that you so other courses, so language courses, books and things. Yeah, I mean, I often use the SMU, the Teach Yourself, and Colloquial. They're the main three that I would use in terms of course books, and they're the ones that I mainly have on my shelves. And then I tend to use, and they would be kind of a base to start from with any language, and then I would tend to use locally sourced materials as well. So books that you go and you get in the country, or if you're learning it normally as somebody who's moved to the country. So yes, that's kind of where I am with that, with those kinds of things. What's my favorite language? My favorite language is actually German. It's an easy question for me to answer, because I learned it with children. I really like German. Okay, so okay, so I'm trying to see if this is a question. I can't say, sorry. Okay. I think I got through the. How do you learn vocabulary with reading? Normally, words when you're reading something in a different language, so you don't need to look up every single word that you don't know. You can if you really want to, and if it doesn't break your concentration or your enjoyment of reading. But normally, reading is good to get an overall idea of how things work. What you find is that the words that you really do need to know tend to get repeated over and over and over again. They're kind of high frequency words, I guess. I'm not a big believer in learning high frequency words just as a thing. It's not something I would normally do, but you tend to find that they come up again and again and again. And then when you see a word, say maybe 4 or 5 times, then maybe note it down if you don't know it and look it up. If you're not unsure of what it means, take a guess about what it take a guess of what it might mean, and then check to see whether that's correct. But yeah, that's kind of how I would use reading to learn vocabulary. It tends to be in context. And do I translate words into my native language? Not normally when I'm sort of speaking. I don't tend to think in other languages when I'm speaking a language or thinking about a language. I tend to try and think in the language itself. I don't tend to think in it. So my neutral way of being is actually no language. I just think in concepts and ideas usually. So translation isn't a part of how I normally would naturally work. Some people do find that they do though. I think I would need to be a lot smarter and quicker to be able to do that. I can't do that. To translate constantly, I'd find it, for me, it would slow me down too much. What mistakes you made among the languages you've learned that you would like to advise others not to do? Okay, so mistakes I've made that I would say don't make yourselves. There are many. Depends on the language. So they tend to be languages themselves. But I think in general terms of language learning, mistakes that we can make are we are too hard on ourselves. So we expect too much of ourselves. We think we're robots. So, I should be doing this and I should be doing that and I could be doing this and I could be doing that if it weren't for this and if it weren't for that. Actually, you know what? Sometimes life is just, you need to just do what you can do when you can do it and be happy. And that's the most important thing. So I'm not a big believer in sort of putting yourself down. The other thing I'd say is setting yourself realistic goals. So not taking on too much, but also setting yourself like goals that you can actually realistically achieve and then feel good about. I think that's really important. And I would say that they're the most common mistakes I see people making. And also worrying too much about making mistakes. Making mistakes is normal. It's natural. It's something we all do, and we're all going to do it. We're going to carry on doing it forever and ever. I've made many of them, and I'll continue to make even more. And if I don't make mistakes, then there's something wrong, because how do I learn? We can't just be automatically perfect at everything. It's just not how things work. So yes, I think that those are the fundamental things for me. That accepting your humanity is probably the easiest way of putting it, and knowing that how you feel is often how a lot of other people feel too. So your insecurities, your inhibitions, your fear of making mistakes or looking silly, they're all the same kinds of issues that a lot of people have in the world. Talk about cooking, but never even in my native language. I love it. Favorite languages? Yeah, German. I see that one again. Of the languages, okay. Yeah, German, because I have a special relationship with German because I learned it with 3 children in German. I was an au pair, and I really enjoyed that time in my life. It was a very positive experience. I was fresh out of university. I went to Germany and I made friends with the family, and we've stayed in touch ever since. And I mean, over the years, obviously the girls have grown up. Yeah, this is a long time ago now, and they've grown up into wonderful young women. And yeah, we touch base every now and again, and we talk to each other now and again. It's really, really nice. And they know that they're welcome wherever I am, whether my family is, anytime. It's a very special bond, you know, when you learn a language with children in that way. It's a very special thing. So yeah, that would be my favorite because of that, because of them, and their mum and dad as well. We had a really good relationship. So Link, yes. So what do you think about colloquial Russian books with audio? So colloquial Russian, I think I used in the very beginning. They were okay. Russian is one of those languages, it just takes time for you to sort of get used to it. And so I've used a lot of materials for Russian, just because it's got a lot of grammar, as many people say, with all of the cases and stuff. So it just takes time to get used to. So I say, yeah, go through a few things like that. Do I speak Amharic? No, I don't, unfortunately, Edward. Any tips for learning Hungarian? Is angolul. Embesel angolul. Do I not speak English? I do speak English. Embesel angolul. No, so for learning Hungarian, actually, there's I quite like this book for Hungarian. Let me see if I got it. Wow. So there are these books that you can get in for Hungarian. Yeah, here they are. So, Hello It Magyarország. And they've got two, and then you have sort of vocabulary, and then they have from the same publisher a grammar. I quite like those. I can't say I've used them with very much success so far, but I quite like them. So as I was saying, you know, when you go to a bookshop and you see books and courses that you feel speak to you, these spoke to me for Hungarian. So I bought them, and yeah, one day, who knows, I might actually end up getting better at Hungarian. So yes. Which specific method do I use to learn languages? Very many different methods, actually. Consistency and planning are the most important things. The actual methods themselves, it doesn't really make a huge difference to me. There are certain things I do, but there's not one method. There's definitely more than one way to skin a cat, as we say. It's not a very pleasant idiom in English, but there's more than one way to skin a cat, for sure. So yes, I would say there's not one method, but there are a number of methods. What do you do when you're starting a language? Do you have specific topics? Yes, I do. 2,000 words in a language, or do you do something else? I don't think I'd set myself a 2,000 word goal or anything like that. I would just carry on and do it. I think if I set myself goals like that, with like I need to know 2,000 words. It's like this thing with Chinese and Japanese and with all this. How many kanji do you know? How many? It's a very interesting phenomenon for me to hear about. I honestly do not consider things like that. I think if I did, I would go kind of crazy. I did at one stage when I was younger have a book that was called 10,000 French words and 10,000 German words and 10,000 Spanish words, or whatever they were called. And I went through and learned all of them. It's a bit crazy. and to be honest, some of the words I learned, I've never really heard used or seen even. So, and then other words you didn't have in those books were used. So yeah, you know what I mean? It's a bit strange, right? Some of them are just used in very odd circumstances. So then you learn the word, and like I learned many animal names, for example, and things like that. And they were used in very strange contexts. Okay. Kako lepo je da imaš na majci da Ljubljana. This is so someone asked me about this, how nice it is what I've got on my shirt. This is actually from the Polyglot conference that we had in Ljubljana. So all the people that volunteered got a t-shirt, a Ljubljana t-shirt, and I got one myself, and I use them when I'm around the house. I use these kinds of t-shirts from conferences and places I go. and I use them sort of just around the house type t-shirts. So yeah, I quite like these little things. They remind me of the people that I meet on the travels. I love it. God, see you. Okay, always attempting to attending Vietnamese. Wow, Vietnamese is a cool language. Try Duolingo. Okay, wow. Yeah, Vietnamese, actually, there's some really, Avery, there's some, depending on the type of Vietnamese you're learning, there are some nice channels here, actually, with for Vietnamese. And there's also a course on Udemy for Vietnamese as well, by the same people who do the YouTube videos. So have a look and see. It's the South Vietnamese that they teach. And I met the guy who does them in Vietnam, really, really nice guy. And they're quite practical. So see what you think. Why so difficult to speak Icelandic very well? I don't know if it's difficult to speak Icelandic very well. I think any language is difficult to speak very, 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 very well, just because it takes time and energy and a lot of years practice. But I don't know. Icelandic is obviously a little bit more difficult than other Scandinavian languages, just because it has cases, it has more verb forms that, for example, Swedish, Danish, Norwegian don't have. So yeah, that makes it maybe a little bit more challenging to commit all those to memory and get them right all the time. So there we go. Yeah. Merhaba. Hello. Let's see. What do I recommend to listen to in German, in Deutsch, auf Deutsch? I would say Deutsche Welle is probably pretty good. On YouTube, there are some really cool things like Frag mal ein, and it means like literally ask a. So Frag, like from Fragen, ein, Frag mal, or Frag mal ein, I think it's called. And it's basically lots of people who talk about, different types of people from different backgrounds, and it's quite interesting to watch because you get people talking about all sorts of different things about their different lives. I quite like that. Books for Russian, there are so many. Again, it's one of those languages there are a lot of books for. I think that the sort of, to get started, you can't go far wrong with a teach yourself Russian or an Assamese Russian if you speak French as well. And then move forward from there. Is Link particularly useful if you want to learn certain language to B levels? Yeah, absolutely. So Link's pretty good because you can import material. So it's good for that. You can import whatever you want and learn whatever you want. Which language has more words, Greek, Bulgarian, or Macedonian? I have no idea. I imagine Greek, just because it's very old in terms of it draws on a lot from ancient Greek, and so there are an awful lot of really ancient words that they draw on, and but hey, I don't know. Unfortunately, I don't know. I would imagine Greek. That would be my first guess. In terms of languages, it's come from the ancient Greek, and it still does use a lot of the ancient Greek terminology and in a number of daily situations that they have. And so, yeah, so possibly that. That's a guess, though. Total guess. Okay, let me just see if I've got any questions here on Instagram, and then I've got to end, unfortunately. I've only got one more minute, and then I have to finish this. I'm so sorry. There are lots and lots of questions here, and I haven't got to you all. For modern Greek, I actually use Click. Click is the best thing, I think. I use this for modern Greek. So I have this is the A2 book. I didn't do A1 because I started learning Greek in the Netherlands years ago. And then they have B1, they have B2, and they have the C, Gamma. In Greek, it's Gamma. It's not C. So Alpha Vita Gamma. That's what I would recommend for Greek. Click στα ελληνικά είναι, και αυτό δεν είναι κακό. I got this one from online, actually. It's got some nice books, nice texts in it as well. The other book that I use for Greek at the moment is this one, which is a B-level book. This one's got some cool texts in it, actually. So this is Ελληνικά Vita. Δεν είναι κακό. Okay. That's pretty cool. Okay, unfortunately, I'm going to have to end this now. Oh dear. I'll see you all next week. Thank you so much for coming, and it's been a pleasure talking to you again. Look forward to speaking to you all soon. Take care.